Hi everyone, my name is Mamoom Khalid. Great to meet everyone. I'm an executive director currently at networkvc.org and a mentor and advisor to many micro VC funds, incubators, and accelerators around the world. I also scout deals for a $1.6 billion Toronto-based revenue share investment firm called Fiaco. Prior to my current roles, I was a director of Q Ventures at Silicon based in New York. A managing partner of a cross-border investment firm called Hackathon Capital, again based in New York, as well as I've had multiple roles in venture building and venture capital over the past 7-8 years. Academically, I'm an engineer. So with that being said, let me introduce Network VC. Network VC is a global startup advisory and corporate innovation consulting group based in New York. We work with startups on primarily fundraising, advisory, and then growth advisory, helping them expand internationally, find customers, develop partnerships, develop technology strategy, HR strategy, and essentially grow. So, and we help corporations and governments around the world in utilizing advanced technologies to increase revenues, reduce costs, find new business opportunities, and add efficiencies in business operations. The topic of our talk today is essentially how to start a technology startup and go about in a step-by-step manner to raise VC funding. So that's what I'll be focusing on for the rest of this conversation today. Let's begin with, if you have a tech startup idea already, or as you're beginning to think about what you should build out, or you go into the entrepreneurial path, let's look at the step one, which is the genesis of an idea. Here, I usually advise founders that I interact with to not go after the noise and interest. Essentially, you see a lot of AI companies getting funded by venture capital firms. So hence, you decide to sort of go after a venture capital startup idea, an AI-based company startup idea. You should identify a problem that you know exists. Or either you've seen it or observed it, or you've experienced it. That's one of the best ways to discover an ideas. And then once you have pinpointed an idea, before building anything or doing anything further, you should do more research. And after you've done research, I like to say, then do more further research. What you're looking to avoid is essentially what's called the availability bias. In psychology, the availability bias is referred to as a tendency to rely on information that is readily available to a person's mind, and using that to evaluate situations and make decisions. As how that manifests itself when you're looking to create a technology company is let's say you think you know a lot about a particular robotic solution and you think you can build it, so you want to sort of go after building it, but maybe it's already built by 10 other startups. The same solution is built by 10 other startups. Same applies for, of course, startup, a software idea, or any other type, e-commerce platform, or anything you can think of. So my advice to all aspiring founders is to make sure they're avoiding the availability bias by doing a lot of research on what kind of solutions that solve the problem you have identified already lie in the startup landscape in your region as well as globally. Once you have, of course, identified a problem and done more research, well, one factor I think that helps you make sure that you're not picking the wrong idea to dedicate a large amount of your energy and time to is to make sure to evaluate the technology landscape essentially. So technology has a weird way of advancing exponentially. So let's say you're building something right now, you have to understand what are some of the other technologies that might make whatever you're working on so obsolete that you won't be able to catch up. So one of the key questions that we ask ourselves at Network VC is if we believe that 10 to 20 years from now there'll be some new and highly successful companies that were built in the years preceding COVID, what would their product or services be? I'll give you an example here. When COVID came, I was working at a Miami-based venture firm called Rocker Labs. They had early stage investments as well as built companies and funded them out of a sister group called Rocker Fuel Venture Capital Fund. So The growth fund that Rocker operated, or the partners of Rocker operated, had just made an investment in a company which essentially provided a two-wheeler mobility solution to the Florida ecosystem. Primarily, people could rent a two-wheeler, use it, put it, leave it whenever they're done, and there was an application that could allow you to find the nearest two-wheeler scooty solution. As you can imagine, as soon as COVID came, this particular company took a big dip in its revenues. No one was using shared services anymore, right? So you can't predict, of course, the COVID trend, but one thing you can do is evaluate the technology landscape, find out what will be some leaps and bounds that will completely circumvent the technology plane that you're operating in. So technology feasibility is very important, of course. And the last thing I'll mention, when you're conceiving an idea to dedicate your entrepreneurial journey to, is to avoid designing your business around a venture capital raise. Okay, it's not wise to design your business entirely reliant on being able to raise venture capital. So that's the key advice I would disperse here. Keep that in mind. I mean, today people ask for money to figure things out. Formerly, people used to build something out and then get after private investment. But it's a trend that has sort of unfolded in the past decade or so. I sincerely advise against designing your entire business idea in a manner that it is reliant on being able to raise private capital, or at least like venture capital. Now that you have identified an idea, let's say a robotics company or an IoT company or an AI software company or whatever else you have, before you start building anything, when it comes to a real product or a service, it's always advisable and wise to sort of build out a comprehensive pitch deck or a business plan prior to building anything real. What that forces you to do is to think about the minutiae of a business that you're looking to build out, the small and trivial details like how will you hit the market, what will be the features of your product or service, what is the customer segment, how big is the total addressable market and the serviceable obtainable market, essentially referring to the market that you can go after. How will you drive sales? What are the key value propositions of your product or service? Do you need external capital? If so, how much capital do you need? Do you have a competitive advantage? All these little things come into play when you're actually, before building anything, you're putting an entire business plan on paper, or whether you call it a business plan or a pitch deck. These minutiae are very important to think out and save you from a lot of pain down the line. Once you have, of course, built out some business materials that outline the idea and all its granularities, you have to start building out a narrative of your company. Storytelling, unfortunately or fortunately, it is very important in the day and age we're living in right now. People, have a tendency, we as customers, as investors, as any category of the global economic ecosystem, every individual tends to fall apart, to fall victim to this bias of making decisions based on how your gut feeling reacts to a particular story. So we judge each other based on how a particular individual makes them feel. Investors judge founders based on how a story of a particular startup makes them feel. It's not something I'm fond of. It's not, it is an unfortunate reality, but founders who are looking to build out companies and seek external capital need to be especially wary of having a compelling story and a solid narrative of why that business is viable and inevitable. We'll talk about inevitability and creating the effect of inevitability in a few consequent slides, but you have to have a very polished narrative. That is a key and a very important detail as you're designing your venture. This is a set of questions that we at Network VC utilize. Essentially, these are recommendations by Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal and many other unicorn technology companies. You have to ask yourself these set of 7 questions that we recommend our founders to ask themselves these questions and be able to answer them very coherently and very definitively, very confidently, and with ample empirical evidence to support these 7 questions: the engineering question, the timing question, the monopoly question, people question, the distribution question, the durability question, and the secret question, which is, do you have a unique opportunity that others haven't seen yet? What is your competitive advantage? Use these 7 points to build out, as I recommended earlier, a narrative and a compelling story for your particular company and its value proposition. And these 7 questions help you guide you in defining that narrative, essentially. Okay, going forward, I mean, this is an important statistic I wanted to share. According to this Harvard Business School professor, Dr. Wasserman, 65% of startups fail because of conflict arising between co-founders. I mean, the first fund that I worked at, called Koi Capital Partners, was my first exposure to the world of technology investing. I saw so many of our portfolio company founders have, issues arising interpersonally that led to the entire company breaking out. I mean, I'll give you a funny story here. We had a drone company in our portfolio which had 2 founders. It was an early stage company and just raised pre-seed or seed level capital from our group. One of the founders' spouse was serving as a legal counsel to the startup, and the other founder, felt that the legal advice that the company was getting from the spouse or of the other founder, the de facto legal counsel, was not up to the par, was not a high caliber legal advice. This essentially boiled over into an interpersonal conflict that eventually ended up with our group arbitrating the issue, that eventually led to one of the founders exiting the company at such a premature point. Bad effect. So, which leads me to my next point, that now that you have a pitch deck and business plan, and you have a narrative, and you've done research on your idea, the next step is to build out a team. Now, when you're looking to build out a team, I understand it's something, and I preach that it's something that should take a lot of time. It shouldn't be easy as finding, a roommate for your college dorm. But it is one of the most important decisions you'll be making as you go further into your startup journey or entrepreneurial journey. You should be looking to build out a high performance, well-founded founding team that is aligned with the vision of the startup. Alignment is very important, of course, and some of the qualities that you should look for in a co-founder. We have a list of them. Vision and alignment, as I said earlier. Vision and alignment means that when you co-found a company with someone, there's a lot of hard steps that the company has to go through. It's not a comfortable journey, and it's not built for everyone. So make sure you understand. You bring on board someone who is, of course, skilled and competent, but also is aligned with the different phases of difficulty that you as a team will be going through together as you're looking to build out a company that hopefully will reach a successful point. But startups are called startups. They are, you're building a new company from a very ground phase. So this is, I can't stress enough that the vision and alignment is the most important thing that you should be looking for in a founding team. But that's not the only thing. Of course, you need to find a well-rounded team which has complementary skills and expertise. You need to have an engineer. You need to have an operator. You need to have an executive visionary involved. That's typically that's the CEO, CTO, and CEO trio. Of course, commitment and accountability refers to being dedicated to the company, giving it the required number of hours, making sacrifices, as a group rather than one person leading the entire company on their shoulders and the other ones not joining them in the effort. So these are all important roles that require commitment and accountability and a sense of accountability. And the fourth thing I'll mention is that you need to have, if you are bringing co-founders in, make sure you're defining the roles and responsibilities of each individual in a very, very clear manner. Human beings have a tendency to create their own job descriptions. This also manifests itself when you're picking co-founders. You might have a technology guy who might not be interested in building technology, might be interested in operations. So you need to have these roles and responsibilities clearly articulated when you're bringing co-founders in. And as you bring co-founders in, you need to start thinking about the cap table formation. A picture tells 1,000 words. If you are able to see this slide here, you have when you build a company, you have an idea. You're the sole founder. You have 100% of the company. When you bring co-founders in, you have to split the founder equity, right? So when you bring, of course, you bring more founders in. If you have 3 founders, it'll be a 33% split, or depending on how much effort and time and resources, you might have a non-equal split as well. But of course, you'll have to think about a efficient cap table strategy, because as you progress along the development of your venture, you will raise probably the first round from your friends and family, people who know you already, not professional investors maybe, but you have to sort of think about what kind of equity you want to give the first round, what kind of equity you want to disperse in the seed round, and consequently as you go about. So this is an important thing to think about at this point. Now that you have an idea that is well thought out, a pitch deck and a business plan built out, and of course you have a team built out, and you have cap tables and everything built out, you're ready to start building an MVP. An MVP, of course, refers to a minimum viable product, which has enough features to satisfy early adopters and for you to be able to roll out and test your value proposition in the market with at least some pilot customers. So you need to start at this point, before you start reaching out to venture capital investors or private investors. It's wise and advisable, especially in today's landscape, to have an MVP built out. This is where founders need to maybe allocate some of their own resources or raise capital from their uncles or aunts or someone from their friends and family. But this is something you need to sort of develop before typically any external investor will not deploy capital in a tech startup if it doesn't have. Now there are exceptions to this rule, but as a general rule, having an MVP is sort of almost a prerequisite to being able to raise private capital or external capital. Now that you have built out, and this is where of course you need to have a good CTO or someone who can build out a product for you. Without going idea specific, I can't really talk much about how to be more efficient and more intelligible about this phase. But let's say you're building a robotics company, you wouldn't be able to start that unless you have a software engineer or hardware software engineer that allows you to sort of be in the space in the first place. So once you have, let's say, built out an MVP, now you're ready to start fundraising. And while you're beginning to start fundraise, I think it's important for us for some aspiring entrepreneurs, some young entrepreneurs, especially in the audience, to understand some core tenets of what a VC or venture capital investor is looking at, and what are some of the considerations with which they are playing at. They are also entrepreneurs in some way. They raise capital from external investors into their fund and to deploy in the startup landscape, right? So they have some considerations as well. To understand the considerations and the mindset of a VC investor, you have to understand some currently unfolding global trends. These are all referenceable links that you can click on and read underlying articles, but I have been a part of the VC industry for almost 7 years. Some things have changed over the past 24 months or so. Number one, the global VC funding has dropped 45% to 50%, which means that there's less investment available to startup founders in the first place. As this is the reason of increasing inflation globally. The limited partners or LPs, who are individuals or groups that typically invest in a VC fund, they are themselves not able to or not interested in actively investing in venture capital funds. As a result, you see a decline in the global VC funding. Startups that are getting funded nowadays need to prove their value proposition, or they need to have a very solid portfolio of intellectual property patents, or you need to have patents that are completely defensible, globally applicable, are built around a completely novel technology. based on unique, tremendous hours and years of research if you don't have any, proven value proposition. So keep in mind that, you might see e-commerce startups and two-sided marketplace or dating apps and like food delivery apps and stuff like that getting less funding these days. Truly high quality AI company will probably get funding in today's climate as well. A truly unique robotics company will probably get funding. A truly unique quantum computing, aerospace technology startup, which has core intellectual property at its backbone, will probably raise capital. But you'll see that if you're not working on something that is truly backed by high quality intellectual property, you need to then have a very solid, proven value proposition, which means good numbers and metrics of user adoption, lifetime value of a customer. These kind of like analytics and metrics need to be very solid for you to be able to successfully raise capital. And the last thing is valuations need to be right for VCs to get involved with this. This is especially true for 2023, and I'll show this in the next slide. But yeah, these days, I was reading somewhere that if you have an early stage company which is valued appropriately, you're more likely to get a VC fund to invest in you. If you're valuing yourself at a $50 million valuation or $100 million valuation, that sort of filters out a lot of early stage firms. So it sort of limits the chances of you being able to raise capital. And this has, again, I'll continue this point, this has ramifications and considerations even from a VC perspective. You have to understand that a venture firm makes a diversified portfolio investment. They are looking for winners in their portfolio. A winner used to be defined as a company or a private investment that generated a 3x return on investment. But keeping in mind that given if you factor in today's inflation rates of 2023, a 3x return over 10-year fund life cycle, which is a typical fund life cycle, is about 12% ROI on investment. It's not exactly like 20 plus ROI. It's still better than, of course, what the S&P stock market offers you. But it is if the inflation increases even more, this 3x will need to become 4x and again it's something that VCs are looking for. They're not going to be made. If you're valuing yourself at $10 million, you have to think about whether you can exit at $30 million, because that's the kind of perspective that a venture capital investor is looking at the company. Okay, let's say that if I'm an investor and I'm looking at a software startup and that is valuing itself at 10 million, what's happening at the back of my mind is I'm interested in knowing whether this company can realistically exit at a $30 million buyout acquisition. But because in that case, I as a VC investor will be able to generate a 3x return, right? So make sure that you're valuing yourself appropriately and keep the 3x rule in mind, because if you're valuing yourself at let's say $50 million, you then need to be able to justify an acquisition route at a $150 million valuation, because in order to be able to address the considerations going on in the back of a VC investor mindset. Now that, okay, so we've talked a little bit about the trends that are important and unfolding currently. You've looked at some of the economics that a venture capital investor has to perform or has to think about. Now I think let's talk a little bit about preparing for a VC raise. You have the basic understanding. I often advise the founders that I work with that make sure you're building momentum ahead of reaching out to investors. What that means is momentum could mean a lot of things. Okay, it could mean PR. As I like to say that being able to draw PR into your particular company is a proof of your ability as an entrepreneur or as a team to draw visibility onto what you're working on. An important trait that investors value. Number two is if you can bring in a high quality Rolodex of advisors and mentors to be a part of your advisory board or your advisory team, that shows that you as a team or as an individual entrepreneur have resourcefulness. And the last but not the least is actual traction. If you can, pull out pilot customer agreements, letter of intents with potential customers or MOUs, memorandum of understandings. You can develop a freemium user base for your software company or whatever. These are all undeniable proofs of product market fit. And I would say that these sort of trump the value of having good PR and high quality advisors and mentors into your company. Having traction is the best, it's the holy grail of being able to build momentum ahead of reaching out to investors. Apart from, of course, understanding the VC investor mindset and understanding the importance of building momentum, you have to also develop, as a founder, you have a thousand hats to wear. You have to understand marketing, you have to understand operations, you have to understand procurement, you have to understand hiring, you have to understand general strategy. But you also have to, one thing if you're looking to raise venture capital, is you have to make sure you understand the basic terminologies of a venture capital raise. What does most favored nation mean? What does a stock warrant mean? What does a qualified small business stock mean? What are liquidation preferences? Liquidation preferences, of course, are a side note, are very important to understand because they have ramifications on your equity dilution. And let's say that there is an acquisition event 5 years after you start the company, 10 years after you start the company, how much money will trickle down to the founders? If you don't understand what liquidation preferences mean, you'll be missing out on a lot of negotiation grounds. Should you successfully land a VC investor? So make sure you understand these basic terminologies that a venture capital raise entails, and also understand how when you're constructing a valuation, as I said earlier, it's important to make sure you're valuing your startup appropriately. But you should also know how venture capital firms evaluate a potential tech startup. I'll not get into this. This is a separate conversation, an area of learning separately from the topic of our conversation today. But I have attached a link here to about 7 different methods that venture capital firms use to evaluate the valuation of a tech startup that they are interested in investing in. These are various methods like the startup method, the venture capital method. There's something called the Berkus method, and there's like 4 or 5 more. I encourage you, if you're looking to build out a company or if you're looking to start your private capital raise, I encourage you to sort of read this document that I've attached here. It will guide you on what kind of metrics and methodologies different VC firms use. I have worked at different firms which use different methodologies. So it's good to know how a VC is going to value your company. Let's say you want to defend a $10 million valuation to a venture firm. Make sure and let's say they get back to you that we use the venture capital method, and we, according to our evaluation and another analysis, we think you're worth $7 million. So unless you know what the venture capital method is, you won't be able to create a coherent defense for getting to that 10 million valuation, right? So that's why I encourage founders to know both the methodologies that a VC firm uses to value a startup as well as the typical terminologies that VCs use. Okay, now that we've done that, of course, let's talk about how to begin an outreach to potential private investors, including venture firms. I encourage founders to, of course, reach out to as many investors as they possibly can. But there has to be a strategy to that, right? We have, a lot of different types of private investors. Of course, we have, early stage VC firms. You have first check VC firms. You have angel investors who are both individuals, as well as you have networks of angel investors. For example, Harvard Business School has its own angel investor network. Individual angel investors usually include tech startup founders who have reached a certain barometer of success, and they're interested in giving back or investing back in the community. And then there's, of course, corporate venture capital firms and corporate incubators as well, which give equity funding, which make equity funding investments. So you have to, of course, reach out to all these different types of stakeholders. But it's important to know that when you're looking to raise capital, you shouldn't be looking to fish, you should be looking to hunt, which means you should know the type of investors that would be a good fit for your particular idea, rather than casting out a wide net and hoping to catch as much fish as you possibly can, right? So you have to be laser focused. You have to research, know your investors. Let's say I have an AI software as a service company and I'm reaching out to a hardware focused investor. I'm wasting my time and the investor's time, right? So it's better to sort of know by the sector you're playing in, by the geography you're based in, and the stage you're playing in. Let's say you're based in Germany, okay, for example. So you should be, and you're an AI AI software as a service company, and you're early stage company, right? You haven't raised capital before. So you should be focused on investors who have made investments in Western Europe and in AI companies at an early stage. So you should be focused on this set of investors who meet these traits, rather than of course spending a lot of hours researching and broadcasting your message to a lot of investors who are not exactly relevant to your stage, sector, or geography. Every venture firm is limited by a mandate which encompasses a stage, a sector, or a geography. The first fund that I worked at only made investments in the US and in Israel. The second fund that I worked at only made investments in the US and in China. The third fund that I worked at made investments primarily in US and Latin America. So you have to, of course, factor in the geography as well, apart from stage and sector. As you're reaching out to a lot of investors who are relevant to your stage, sector, and geography, rather than sending out your deal materials to all investors at once, I usually advise founders to, let's say you have 100 investors who are relevant to your particular idea, stage, and geography. Reach out to 10 or 20 of them first. Understand the feedback you're getting from these investors, whether it's an acceptance, whether there's an indication of interest, whether there's a flat-out rejection of the mandate or it not being a good fit. Use this feedback to sort of go after the next batch of 20 investors, improve your materials, improve your messaging, improve your narrative, improve your methodology. Try to find, maybe you find that, the people advising you and making these introductions are not exactly making warm introductions. They're essentially conducting cold outreach. So for the next 20 investors, you can focus on improving your narrative and trying to find nodes of introduction which serve as a warm introduction node rather than a node of cold email or something like that. So make sure that it is generally advisable to sort of, let's say you have 100 investors, create a batch size, reach out to that batch of investors, use the feedback to improve your messaging and everything else, your strategy and your messaging, go after the next set of investors and repeat. Rather than reaching out to all the 100 investors at the same time. Again, this is, so the last point I have outlined here is that you need to create a sense of inevitability about the future in your messaging, in your narrative. You need to speak, you need to have a message that conveys unshakable conviction in your story. You need to deliver that story, in your introduction materials, or if you get a meeting set up with a potential founder, you need to deliver that story with extreme confidence. You need to use the right terminologies. And you need to, of course, what I mean by a sense of inevitability about the future is you need to show them that, regardless of whether a venture firm invests in you or not, the solution that you're building out will reach out the global markets. It's inevitable. So you have to, I think that's what I mean by being able to create through your narrative a sense of inevitability about the future of the solution or the product or service that you're working on. Another soft skill that I think is very important as you do go about with your investor outreach, it's controlling the frame and maintaining a high status for you as a founder and as a company. These are some soft points, but they're very, very, very important, I would say. These essentially are the other side of the same coin, which I mentioned earlier, that you need to have a strong narrative, but then being able to hold that narrative in front of a real investor is just as important. Um, there's a corporate word, there's a word gravitas that refers to the perceived seriousness of you and your work. So make sure that you're controlling the frame, you're maintaining your gravitas, and you're never putting the investor at a higher status than your own self. You have to be respectable, but you shouldn't come across as weak. Now, to this point, I want to share the story of a founder who I learned about recently. The company had great metrics, a very solid management team. They had a great product. They were generating traction. They had PR. They had everything that suffices to call a startup a high quality startup. But they were not able to build success or reach success with venture capital investors that they were talking to. When their investor calls were reviewed, it was found that there was a lot of statements like thank you for your time today, really appreciate it, I'm so excited to talk to you, please don't hesitate in jumping in and interrupting me at any point. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. If there's anything you need from me, I'm happy to facilitate it in an immediate manner. Like these are all statements and which decrease the value and status of a founder in the eyes of a VC investor. This is basic human psychology 101. Investors aren't looking for a founder that they cannot call a peer. Investors are not looking for a founder that isn't at their level of professionalism and at their level of accomplishment. So it's something that I mentioned at the last, but it's essentially the most important point that I'd like to drill and re-drill into the founders that I've worked with. Of course, you need to have a solid story. You need to have great company. You need to have great team, great product and service. You need to build a minimum viable product that works. But if you can't convey that in a manner that it needs to be conveyed at to an investor who actually joins you on an introduction call and is interested in learning more about you and your company, then everything else you've done will sort of fall down the drain. And it's an unfortunate reality. I wish it wasn't, but it's how human beings are built. It's like I said, human psychology 101. You see implications of this psychological effect, not only in the startup and founder and VC investor dynamics, but you see this play out in almost every interpersonal and professional and matters of governance. Even you see this playing out in every aspect of life. You see this in trial. When lawyers are making a case to a judge for a particular for the defense of a particular defendant, this effect plays out. When you're finding a relationship partner, when you're looking for a partner in your life, this effect plays out. When you're looking for a customer, this effect plays out. When you're looking eventually for a buyer for your company, this effect will also play out. So just this is something important to remember. Be respectful, but don't decline your own value. Don't come out as a weak individual or a weak team. And it's important to make sure that you're placing yourself at a higher status than what you're placing the investor, acquirer, or anyone else looking to invest in your company. Last but not the least, it's something that I do want to say at the end. I said this earlier as well. Make sure you're not designing your entire business around a venture capital raise. It's also good to mention this at the end that as you're going about with your venture capital raise process, give it a definitive timeline. Let's say you begin. Let's give it 12 months, right? That you'll try to raise venture capital or any other external capital for about 12 months. But if you're not able to, then it's fine. Like you should never have designed your venture around being able to raise venture capital or private capital funding as an absolute necessity for you to be able to build a company. So remember that some of the most successful companies in the world right now have not had a VC raise. I was reading somewhere there of the Fortune 500 companies, less than 20 or less than 15% of the companies in the Fortune 500 index have raised venture capital at an earlier stage. So this is something that I wanted to share at the last as a last point. Don't let a VC raise be the bane of your existence. Don't let a VC raise define or validate your entrepreneurial dreams. Most successful companies have not been validated by venture firms. In fact, one legendary US-based VC firm is called Bessemer Venture Partners. They have an entire section on their website called the anti-portfolio, where they list out some very successful companies that they had a chance to invest in, but they were skeptic and didn't invest. And now those are very successful companies, globally well known, and generating multi-billion-dollar revenues. So keep in mind that every VC firm, the best of the best venture capital investors in the world, have their own anti-portfolio as well. So it's important to know that. I think that's it for today. We have about 30 minutes to talk. Good luck as you're going about with designing and starting your entrepreneurial journey, or if you're already midway and you're looking to raise private capital. Feel free to reach out to us where we are. We evaluate companies with a particular thesis. We have a perspective with which we evaluate companies. I think I mentioned this earlier. Some companies became increasingly relevant post-COVID. Some companies became less relevant, and some companies became completely obsolete post-COVID. We have this detailed thesis with which we evaluate companies. But if we think you're a company that falls in the type of, or the bucket of companies that we consider to be relevant post-COVID, we want to be involved. Reach out at the email address provided here, and we are looking to support 400 to 500 companies in the next 4 years. We work with a lot of VC firms around the world, and so we have our own venture partner network, which consists of a lot of VC firms or investors from a lot of VC firms. We collaborate with a lot of angel and investor networks. So if you think that you have a high quality tech startup that is increasingly relevant in the post-COVID reality of the world, feel free to reach out. We'd love to engage and learn more. Thank you so much.